Well, here we are back in Revelation again after a few weeks of not being in Revelation. We're ready to jump back into the story. Revelation is a part of the Bible that many of us avoid because it's a bit strange, and other Christians seem to be obsessed by it, and sometimes that can be a bit unhealthy as well. And the truth is that Revelation is different. It's an unusual kind of writing. Certainly from our experience, it wasn't as unusual for the ancient culture that it was written into. Apocalyptic writing. It means writing that reveals something that is hidden. That's why we get the name Revelation. It is a revealing of something. It's a pulling back of the curtain to see what's going on in the spiritual realm. And so what the book of Revelation does is it comes to us with these great images, these fantastic signs and symbols to help describe spiritual realities. And I would suggest that's the most important thing to remember when you're reading Revelation. This is a picture to describe a reality. It is not itself the reality of the thing. And we know that very clearly, don't we, from the very beginning when it talks about Jesus standing there with a sword coming out of his mouth. And things like that. We're not going to one day see Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth. We know that, don't we? And so we need to be very careful, and particularly this is one of the chapters that we need to be very careful with, because it seems that sometimes we can read the book of Revelation and accept it as symbolic all the way through, and then we get to something and we decide to choose that this bit actually is going to be real and it's going to actually happen. And as we read at the end of chapter 13 of Revelation, there's a description of something going on that many Christians around the world, and the Christian world in the West in particular, has been troubled by this notion that there's going to be something called the mark of the beast, and there's going to be the number 666 that's going to suddenly afflict us all from out of nowhere. And I'm going to say something a bit different this morning, because I don't believe that that's what we're being told here in this passage of symbols. In the same way that the dragon in chapter 12 was thrown down to the earth, we know that dragon is a symbol of the spiritual reality of Satan, who is not himself a dragon, but is a spirit. And in the same way that the beasts that come out of the sea and the beasts that come from the earth that we're going to read about in chapter 13 are symbolic, and so in the same way the mark of the beast and the number 666 here in this chapter is symbolic. We're not jumping from symbol to reality. We're going to stick with the consistency of the witness of the testimony of John as he gives us these symbols as we read them. None of that means that it's not real. It's just not physically manifest in the way that it's described here. There are deep realities behind all of this that we need to know about and we need to be aware of. So we're going to approach Revelation chapter 13 in that way. Just to remind us and get us up to speed before we start reading Revelation 13. In chapter 12, the great dragon, the destroyer, the liar, has been cast out of heaven. He's been thrown down to the earth by this mysterious Saviour who is pictured as a baby in Revelation 12. And the dragon is furious, the enemy is furious. And so it's not over yet. The empire is going to strike back in Revelation chapter 12, verse 13. So let's read how he strikes back. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. I guess if a terrible crime is committed in Radcliffe today, one of the things the police will ask the victim is, can you describe them for us? Can you describe your assailant? And the victims and any witnesses of the terrible crime will do their best to describe the culprit. The police might produce a photo-fit image or an artist's impression. They might see if the image produced from the witness accounts matches any of their usual suspects. And we can do something similar here with these beasts as they come out of the sea and out of the land that are called forward by the dragon as the dragon strikes back in anger at the Creator and at the creation. And so the first thing I want us to notice this morning is identifying the features of the beast. Identifying the features of the beast. What is it about this beast that we're being told here? We can't possibly go into all the detail of everything, but there are some general themes that come up as we look at the features of this beast. This symbol of what the dragon is doing in the world in response to his defeat. He has been defeated by the Son of God. He's been defeated by the dragon slayer, Jesus Christ, but he's cast down to earth and he's furious. What is he doing in his fury and in his anger? Well, the features of these beasts tell us a few things. The first thing is in verse 1 of chapter 13, they have 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on the horns. This is a beast that can stretch out and have its claws all over the world. It's multifaceted. It doesn't come in one particular guise or another. You think about all these heads with all these horns on, and every horn has got a crown on it. This is a multifunctional beast. And the fact of the crowns is telling us that these beasts exercise great authority in the world. We see that playing out as the vision continues, don't we? But basically, we're being told is that these beasts rule over people, and they have great power in the world. They have political power. That's what the crowns mean. They have economic power, and that's described in the verses, isn't it? And in their rule and in their reign, they seek to replace God in the lives of their subjects. That's why they have a blasphemous name written on each of their heads. The ultimate blasphemy is not saying certain words. The ultimate blasphemy is trying to replace God on his throne. The ultimate blasphemy is what the enemy persuaded Adam and Eve to do in the beginning in the garden. And we've been playing our part in the ultimate blasphemy ever since, taking God off his rightful throne and sitting there ourselves. And that's what these beasts want to do. They have all this power, this military power, this political power, this economic power, and they use it to lead the people, to suppress the people, and to force the people to worship them instead of worshipping God. That's what's happening in this image, isn't it? In this vision. Verses 3 and 4, they seem invincible and unbeatable and eternal. One of them in verse 3 has got a fatal wound on one of the heads, but the fatal wound has been healed and he's alive again. Which is telling us that this isn't just something that has got a global reach in terms of space. It's also got an ongoing reach in terms of time. It doesn't matter if one of these seats of power is destroyed. It won't be long before another one comes up in its place. And people follow these powerful leaders with adoration and adulation, and they say together, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" This beast is all-powerful. Nobody can stand against such might and such power, and people are in awe. Verse 7, the beast is particularly concerned to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. The second beast appears like a lamb. The lamb in Revelation is the image of God, isn't it? And so these beasts take godlike status in the lives of the people that they lead. Verse 13, they perform great signs and continue to encourage people to worship them and to be devoted to them. Verse 15, violence and intimidation are used to force people to worship them. Verse 16, an economic system is set up that ties everybody in. You will not trade without our say-so. You will not trade without our mark stamped upon you. All the money belongs to us, and so do you. Do you recognize it? Some people recognize it straight away. It's all around us. It's our reality. It's what we live in all the time. That's what the vision's telling us. We make a mistake when we think that this is some great thing that's going to happen in the future, some terrible thing, and we don't recognize the features of the beast. This is empire. For the people that were reading this, it was the Roman Empire. They would have recognized it straight away. This is what Rome does to us. It forces us to follow them by threat of the sword. It wows us with technology, with straight roads. What did the Romans ever do for us? It's a long list. They wow us with the things that they can do. They make us say, who is like this empire? And the people first receiving this vision would have known what it was to have Roman money imposed on them and a foreign taxation system imposed on them. And the people under the Roman Empire knew what it was. Those that were Christians knew what it was to have the fury and the might of the Roman Empire pushed down on them and trying to destroy them, wave after wave. The features then of these beasts are telling us that this is the dark power of empire. And what did the Roman Empire do when its power began to wane? It lined itself up with this new movement called Christianity. And it got even more power than it had before. The second beast. And that's not just something that we're saying about the Roman Empire. This is something we're saying about all empires everywhere that have ever existed. forcing the allegiance of the people through signs and wonders, through violence and oppression, through economic control, forcing people to say, you are our God, great emperor. You are our God, great empire. We live and we die for you. Have you ever had that strange experience where you've been at a military air show and you've watched the amazing aeroplanes going over, and the crowd gasps and wonders in amazement? Wow, look at that. Aren't we powerful? Isn't this wonderful? Signs and wonders in the sky. The commentator rarely tells you how many innocent Yemenis children have been bombed to death by that aeroplane. Empire. Its features are all around us. We live under it. There is nothing much we can do. And then secondly, I want to notice the claws of the beast. You can see the claws of the beast everywhere. Already saying this, really. There's a saying that knocks around, isn't there? Our friends used to say it to one another, and my friends used to say it about me once upon a time. We'd look at one of our friends who we hadn't seen for a long time and seemed to disappear off the radar and wonder why they'd disappeared off the radar, and we'd say, oh, well, she's really got her claws in him, hasn't she? We don't see him anymore. And you see, the beast has got it. These beasts have got their claws everywhere. The claws of this beast extend, as we've already alluded to, beyond the Roman Empire. And as we've already noticed, there's this idea that these beasts can be wounded, they can be fatally wounded, they can disappear, but another one will rise up in its place, and it will take the dominion and the power, and it will demand the allegiance of its people, of its citizens. One seems to breathe life to another and give life to another. Even as one's fading away, it's feeding life to another empire that's going to rise up. And we know that the Roman Empire fell, of course, but there have been other empires since, haven't there? The Ottoman Empire, the Prussian Empire, and it doesn't end there. An overview of human history will tell you that empires rise and empires fall, and just as one is falling, there is another rising up to take its place. And that's what's being pictured with these beasts. A few hundred years ago, the whole world, it seemed, was under the sway of the British Empire. And how glorious we're led to believe it was. What a blessing we were to the Indians. The saying was that the sun did not set on the British Empire. We had territories in every part of the globe, from Australia, South and Southeast Asia, to Canada, far off to the north and the west, and everywhere in between. And you may not be surprised to know that those territories were not won by us going and being everybody's friend and giving out candy, negotiating peaceful takeover, because they could all see what a blessing the British were going to be to them. No, like the Romans before us, we used advanced technology that wowed the people. We used advanced warfare that killed and forced innocent people into our empire. We imposed economic systems that milked people of their money so they couldn't buy or sell unless they had the stamp of approval of the British Empire. These are all similar. These are all very familiar features here in Revelation 13, aren't they? And that milking of whole continents like Africa and Southeast Asia continues to this very day. If you want to know what the features of the beast are and where the claws of the beast extend, coming out of this passage into the world that we live in, go and investigate the partition of India and find out what we did there. And go and investigate multinational companies like Nestle and find out what they're doing in Africa today. Continuing to rob that wealthy, wealthy continent of its wealth for the benefit of an empire. What would the inhabitants of the villages and tribes and communities on the West Africa coast have said 400 years ago when those slave boats appeared on the horizon flying the flag of the Union Jack? After we'd swept down in violence on those West African villages, taking men, women and children as slaves. They may well have said to one another, "We are in the claws of a beast." And that Union flag would not have been the mark of liberty that we often see it as from our perspective. They would have seen it as the mark of a terrible, terrible affliction. Or ask the 100,000 ladies who were kidnapped and brutalised during the British partition of India in 1947 what they think of Britain. Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. Should make us feel very, very uncomfortable as British Christians. It's Revelation chapter 13. But all of that is to say that the mark of the beast is everywhere. There is no good empire. As soon as the human race gathers up together and says we're going to build political power for ourselves and we're going to force others under our system, we're in Revelation 13. The claws of the beast extend around this world in the affairs of men as we build empire and seek to control and dominate others. We live with the reality of these two beasts in our world every day. And the reason for that is explained to us in verses 16 to 18, and that brings us to our third and final point for this morning, which is we need to understand the mark of the beast and how we can deal with it. In verse 16 we're told, "It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. A lot of very strange interpretations have been made about these verses. Some Christians predict a future where we will all literally have the mark of the beast put on us, and our job will be to resist it. That all true Christians will be living out in the Canadian woods somewhere on the run, refusing to take the mark of the beast. Very romantic picture. 666 is the number of the beast. So much mythology built up around that. Some Christians would even be very uncomfortable when we keep saying 666. In case you're worried about things like that, my driving license or my passport number used to have 666 right in the middle of it. So maybe I'm the problem. Is that what it is? Is that what the Bible's telling us? These three numbers have some kind of power? Well, I think verse 18 is making it clear. Verse 18 is saying this calls for wisdom. Have a bit of wisdom and calculate the number of the beast. What do you think the number of the beast is? On the basis of what we've read in these verses, on the basis of that hard-hitting reality of us all being part of this human endeavour for empire and control and domination, where does the mark of the beast lie? It's the human heart, isn't it? Isn't the human heart deceitful above all things? Isn't the human heart corrupt and wicked? Don't we know from looking at politics over the years and history and even our own political situation right now that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely? Why is that? It's because, as verse 18 says, if it could be translated, verse 18, it is the number of man, which I think would be a better translation. You could talk about the young man in Africa who grew up loving cricket, and he would play whenever he got a chance, and he also loved reading and education, and he worked hard at his books and his learning, and by the end of his life he had 7 university degrees, and all the way to the end of his life he kept himself fit well into later life by playing cricket almost every day. And he said as he grew in stature amongst the nation where he lived, that cricket is the sport of gentlemen, that cricket civilises people and creates good gentlemen. And when he became Prime Minister of that country or President of that country, he said, I want everyone to play cricket in our nation. I want ours to be a nation of gentlemen. What a nice chap. Many of the counts of this man are that he was a nice guy. He was a gentleman. He was very polite, very rarely had arguments with people. Quaint and lovely man. His name was Robert Mugabe, and he was responsible for terrible atrocities in the country he led for nearly 40 years. Why was that? Because with that mark in his heart, that desire for domination and control, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so our response to this passage and this story and this vision surely should be to turn to ourselves and to say, well, what about me? What about me? Never mind the conspiracy theories, never mind being able to take down the politicians, never mind being able to criticise the banks. All that's there, isn't it, in this passage? Something's terribly wrong, and this vision is telling us what's terribly wrong, but let's not ever think that my job is to point the finger first at somebody else. Let's not ever think that my job first and foremost is to turn up at a protest telling the world what's wrong with everybody else. The problem of empire in our world is a problem that resides in you and me. We all have this mark of the beast, it's man's number. I know how many times I've raised my voice at those around me who are smaller and more vulnerable than me because my life is being disturbed in some way. I know how many times I've used emotional manipulation to get my own way. I know how many times I've browbeaten people into taking my point of view as their own. And who knows what kind of monstrous deeds you and I might be capable of if we ever found ourselves with the power of a whole nation at our disposal. I'd be terrified of myself, wouldn't you? Church, we live in a beautiful and a wonderful world, made by our beautiful and wonderful Creator, but it's a world with a problem, a world with a deep flaw. And we see that in the ways the vulnerable and the weak are treated, the way the powerful grab power and build empire at the expense of others. We live in a tragically broken world, and the problem starts here. It starts with the face I see in the mirror every morning, and the troubling behaviour that is exposed from time to time when life gets difficult or when life gets really, really good. There is by now a very famous and well-used story that some decades ago the Times newspaper wrote an editorial and asked the question and invited a response to the question, what is wrong with the world? And G.K. Chesterton, the famous author and philosopher, famously wrote back to the Times newspaper a letter that says the following: Dear Sir, I am yours, G.K. Chesterton. We can't do anything really about these great beasts of empire and injustice that dominate our world and dominate our landscape, not really. That's part of the message of these verses, isn't it? We can't fight it face on. These things will always be with us in different guises. There was a meeting in Cornwall a few days ago that looks very much like some of this stuff. But the good news is that there is a quiet revolution going on. There's a new kingdom growing, one soul at a time and one new life at a time. Like a mustard seed that's gone into the ground. Like a harvest field that's full of weeds but also full of wheat. And this quiet revolution that one day is going to completely change the world and renew it forever starts with me and you, and we are all invited. This is the call of God in Jesus Christ. Be part of the revolution. Be part of the different kingdom. So the question that comes from this chapter for me and you is, are you in? Are you in the quiet revolution that's going on? You and I need a radical solution, don't we? There's something about our identity that's marked by all of this. Which is why it's hopeless in the end for me to take a passage like this and to say to you, you can do it, guys, go on. Go and be the difference. That's hopeless to say unless we've understood that the difference we need comes from outside of ourselves, that we need a saviour. First of all, we need a new identity. We need to look outside ourselves to the one who washes us clean and gives us a whole new identity, a whole new heart. And we need to look to the one who came into this world to live amongst us as the perfect man, unmarked by the mark of this stuff. The only one who was never marked by it. The one who, when he came face to face with the Roman Empire, nose to nose with the beast of the Roman Empire, looked Pontius Pilate in the eye and said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would have fought against you." Isn't that just the most wonderful good news? There is one king whose kingdom is not of this world, who does not pertain to these beast-like qualities, but actually has come to slay the beast and the dragon and has won the victory. And we are invited into his kingdom of peace and love and hope and mercy and justice. A kingdom that is growing all over the world. And there's nothing that the beast can do to stop it. There is one who willingly, who did not set up a counter kingdom to kill the other kingdoms and do all kinds of damage in the process, but one who came to willingly give himself for sinners like you and me, to take the curse of our sin upon himself and die to be our saviour, to welcome us to the quiet revolution that's going on around the world. The one who is dead and who is alive again, the Lord Jesus Christ, he invites us all to be part of the new kingdom, his new kingdom. The kingdom that will outlive and outlast all human empire. The one who has defeated sin and death and who will one day return to make this world new. Are you in? Do you know him? Have you heard his invitation and have you accepted? That's what it is. This is what it is to be a Christian. He invites us today to know him and to follow him, to confess our sin, to confess our part in the fallen nature of this world, to stop pointing the finger at everybody else and come before God honestly, come before the cross honestly and say, it's me that needs this. I'm the one. Please make me new. Please forgive my sin and lead me in the quiet revolution that starts in my life, in my family, in my front room, in my office space, in my leisure time, in my relationships. Lord Jesus, let me be part of your new kingdom. And the answer to that prayer is always yes. You're welcome. You are so welcome. And then, as we begin to live our lives for him, we will find him calling us to live differently, to be part of this quiet new revolution. Let's make sure we're following the true King in everything that we do.